There's turds in every punch bowl. It's just depending on what level you're at, there's less.
That was it?
That was it.
Holy, how did that feel when you got the word, hey, you're done here, it's over?
Pretty awful.
For some reason, I never, ever got to work with the Rangers.
Wow.
So, I'm interested in the culture because I don't know about it.
B Company 375 is the company that was involved in Somalia in the Black Hawk Down incident in '93. So there was a lot of, and then you still had like Grenada Raiders and Panama guys that were still around the battalion. So even though it was a peacetime war and we weren't involved in anything at the time, there was quite a bit of legacy and history in 3rd Ranger Battalion.
Yeah, I'll bet you showed up with a shit ton of experience on board. I haven't had any Rangers on yet. And I understand the difference, but I think a lot of the civilian population do not understand the difference. There's tabbed Rangers and there's schoolhouse Rangers, and it is confusing for a lot of people. Can you kind of clean that up a little bit? Yeah,
I mean, Ranger School is an Army school. For a lot of years, I don't know what they classify it as now, but for a lot of years, you know, the people defined it as a leadership course, and I think it still is to this day. You know, it's about leading small units in combat, preparation and understanding of operations orders, patrolling, basically small unit tactics in various environments. Ranger Regiment is a unit. So when you first go to the Ranger Regiment, you are not Ranger qualified. You haven't been to Ranger School, even though you are serving in the Ranger Regiment. Part of the pipeline for you as a young soldier in the Ranger Regiment is to attend Ranger School. So typically guys do it early on in their career when they're a young private or a specialist. They go to Ranger School, they earn their Ranger tab, then they come back and they're prepared, you know, mentally, intellectually for that next leadership position, which is a team leader. So yeah, anyone can go to Ranger School. It's typically part of the pipeline, and infantry officers and combat arms officers in the Army, typically they go to Ranger School right away to gain that leadership and experience training and that hardship and overcoming that before they go out and lead troops. So yeah, there is a difference. There's lots of guys in the service that have never been an Army Ranger that have a Ranger tab and are called Ranger qualified.
So I think I may have misspoke. I think, is it a regimental Ranger versus a tabbed Ranger, or is it a schoolhouse Ranger versus a tabbed Ranger?
There's how do I say it?
Yeah, how do you say it?
If you ever served in the Rangers, so in the Ranger Regiment, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd Ranger Battalion, or the regiment itself, you're an Army Ranger.
Okay.
If you went to school but never served in the Ranger Regiment, you are Ranger qualified.
Okay.
That's how most guys in the Army refer to it.
All right.
So, like, I had heartache with that for a lot of years because
I know a lot of guys did.
So I went to the regiment as a young private, and a year after being there, I had an alcohol-related incident. I had a DUI, and at the time, if you had an alcohol-related incident, you had to leave. So I left the regiment after about a year and change for having this alcohol-related incident. So even though I served there, I trained there, and I was a part of that organization, I left. Well, then I never ended up going to Ranger School. Like, it just never happened. The way path that my career took, I never did it. And so for years, people would be like, were you an Army Ranger? And I would be like hesitant to say yes. Because like I just described to you, well, yeah, I was, but my brain would go, kinda.
Yeah.
But were you? You know what I mean? But the reality was, as time went by, and I listened to more guys that have been there for a really long time, is, you know, whether you spent a week, a day, or 20 years in the regiment, if you served in the regiment, you can call yourself an Army Ranger. And so eventually I got over it. And that year, that short little time that I had in that organization, you know, I got more training and leadership development in that stretch of time than I would have gotten in several years in a conventional unit. So when something bad happened like that and I had to like pull my boots up and overcome it, I think the fact that I had done all of those things in that short period of time contributed to my success when I had to go out and overcome this obstacle of having just made a mistake. So when I ended up in the regular Army, I think it allowed me to more quickly adjust to having the personal confidence that if I keep at this and excel, I can get back on track where I need to be. But that took a few years.
What's the culture like at the Ranger Regiment? Especially,
then,
you said you got in at 94, 95?
95, 96, yeah.
And Smalley was 93?
Yeah, so it's 3 years later. Yeah, culture-wise, I mean, it was the hardest training place in the Army. Like, you were always doing something. So, you got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, went and did PT every morning as a platoon or a squad. Always pushing hard. You had to be able to max your PT tests and all that. Like, yeah, it was some hard charging, hard training dudes, which wasn't necessarily the case in the rest of the conventional Army.
Okay, yeah.
So when you leave that, and having that been your only norm after basic training, airborne school, and all that, and then you go out to big service, and there's dudes that are overweight, and there's guys that can barely pass their push-ups or whatever on the PT test. It's a pretty eye-opening experience because I had no idea, I had no frame of reference that the rest of the Army, even in combat arms, could frankly be like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was easy to excel in that environment, but it was a pretty big culture shock going from one extreme to the other.
When, I don't want to go into it yet, but when did you go from Ranger Regiment to conventional, or did you go somewhere else and then go to conventional?
No, I went to conventional. I went from 3rd Ranger Battalion to 3rd Infantry Division. So I went from being an airborne ranger serving in the regiment to a mechanized infantry battalion, where I was riding around in tracks and tanks. Because I was a 11 Charlie. So in the regiment, I was in weapons platoon. I was a mortar guy. And because I was an 11 Charlie, they had a few more options with me than they did like a standard rifleman 11 Bravo. So they sent me to what's called Kelly Hill, where 3rd Infantry Division was, still on Fort Benning. So all I did was move across post, which I think was also made it hard.
Yeah.
Because I just left over there.
Oh, damn. Yeah, that would
now I'm over
tough.
here. But, most guys went, what's called worldwide assignment, where and you go away to some other installation or somewhere. But because I was a mortar guy, they sent me to 3rd ID.
Okay. I've worked with a lot of other soft units, being a SEAL, and then some of my time at the agency. For some reason, I never, ever got to work with the Rangers.
Wow.
So I'm interested in the culture because I don't know about it. When you get in there, in a lot of soft units, the entire team's involved in mission planning and putting together target packages and all that kind of stuff, and everybody has their specific duties, and everybody is... I guess what I'm trying to say is all ideas are welcome to the table.
Sure.
You might get called a fool if you got a dumbass fucking idea, but
yeah.
But there's always a way to get your idea in there, and it's encouraged. Is it like that in the Ranger Regiment?
It wasn't when I was there. So Ranger Regiment back then was, they were the best trained airborne infantrymen on the planet. So they shot more, they jumped more, they fast roped, they did some things that conventional forces didn't do, but they were still run like an infantry rifle platoon.
Okay.
So you had 4 squads, you had two team leaders in each, or team leaders and squad leaders, platoon sergeant, platoon leader, first sergeant, company commander. Like, they were led like a standard rifle company when it
Very
came.
rank structured.
Very rank structured, absolutely. Yeah, you had to earn your keep at the lower levels before you were, moved up the ranks and were a non-commissioned officer and in charge of people. But yeah, it was very much led like traditional, any rifle platoon anywhere in the Army.
Okay.
Yeah, nowadays, and they do a lot more than they ever used to. I would imagine it's still run relatively the same though, because regardless of the amount of training that you've received, you're still an 18-year-old kid. You're still a 19-year-old kid, and lack the combat and personal experience to make appropriate decisions. So I imagine they still run it mostly the same, even though they do a lot more things. Like CQB wasn't really a part of a lot of what Regiment did when I first got there. Now those guys are they're an extension of JSOC and hit targets on their own, and yeah, they're fully capable of doing all those things.
Yeah, it seems like, everybody's done a lot of growing after 20 years of war. From the outside looking in to all these different units and interviewing guys, to me, it appears that the Ranger Regiment is the one that has probably grown the most professionally, and I guess coming from where they were pre 9/11 to where they are now. Seems to me they've done the most changing as a whole unit. But would you agree with that?
I mean, everybody's evolved. I think what the Global War on Terror, what GWAT did was it got a lot of people doing basically direct action missions where that necessarily wasn't their previous profile. You know, as an example, you had, ODAs, you had Green Berets out there whose specialty is unconventional warfare and buy through and with stuff, using and training indigenous forces to achieve an objective, amongst a bunch of other things. But, they were doing DA, they were doing raids and assaults, and yeah, sure, maybe with some indige at some point, but they were also doing them unilaterally. Like that happened because of GWAT and so many missions and op tempo and all that stuff. And I think it happened across the soft community.
Yeah.
And I think that happened to the regiment as well. I think they got pulled in and utilized in a lot more circumstances that they necessarily weren't built for. They were built for airfield seizures. They were built for jumping into, like Just Cause in Panama or 83 in Grenada. They were built to jump in, seize an airfield, eliminate the threat on that airfield, and establish an airhead to bring in follow-on forces to do other things. Or quick reaction stuff or whatever. What they morphed into was an independent assault force that had a capability equivalent to most special operations units. So I personally don't think it was the correct thing, but I think it's just what happened because we were so busy.
Yeah.
So they definitely grew and expanded, in my opinion. I mean, when we, later on in my career, I watched how we utilized the Ranger Regiment go from utilizing them in support of us to utilizing them as another action arm so that we could do more things at a time.
Oh.
And there's pros and cons to that. You expand your workforce and your ability to hit more targets at a time and do more on the battlefield. But I think you lose a little something.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some things that are brought to the table with seasoned special operators that you don't necessarily get with an 18 or 19-year-old kid.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably, and I don't know because I don't have the experience, but it's probably similar in the SEAL community. You have the SEAL community, which is guys from 18 or 19 to the end of their career, but then you have SEAL Team 6,
Mm-hmm.
which is, more seasoned SEALs that have been there, done that, and learned from those experiences. And I'm sure there's some huge differences between the two.
Absolutely. What kind of stuff were you doing after you got through the training pipeline at the regiment?
They had a cycle. So, you'd have stretches, and this is my recollection, but, we'd have cycles where we were doing a lot of shooting and a lot of range time. And then we would do what they called fixed wing and rotary wing bilats. So fixed wing was like you do a lot of jumping and airfield seizures for a stretch and different planes and whatever. And then you do rotary wing bilats where you do a lot of, infills with helos and fast rope training and all that. You sort of had a cyclical thing. And then you had your ready force cycle where you were the on-call battalion in the event that, somebody hits 911 for the United States Army. You had to be ready to go anywhere in, I don't know what it is, like 18 hours or less or something. But so it was a typical training cycle of preparation and training, range time, the various bilats, mount training where you're doing urban stuff, patrolling training, MTTs, so little courses like, basic demolition or whatever those other skills were. And then you had your pre-deployment phase later on if you were deploying. Back then it was just your prep for if something happened phase. And then you had your down phase where you weren't on alert cycle and they would do block leave and things like that. But yeah, I think the biggest difference for me between the regiment and when I went out to the regular Army was in the regular Army, there'd be whole days where you did nothing. Dudes would just be sitting in their barracks rooms, doing correspondence courses or hiding out basically. And it was kind of accepted. Looking back years later, I know that budgets and things have a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
Conventional units just don't get millions and millions of dollars to buy ammunition and rounds to be out on the range and training. Whereas, people that fall into the special operations bubble did. So it subsequently increases proficiency and all those things. But yeah, there were a lot of time where you're just doing nothing. And that was a shock.
Did you deploy with the regiment?
No, not to combat.
Okay.
Because it was peacetime. I did a deployment per se with them. We went to Germany We jumped in and did a 40-mile movement to an objective. And
a 40-mile movement?
A 40-mile movement through Germany. And I want to say...
On foot?
I want to say Stanley McChrystal, General McChrystal, was in the regiment. He might have been 3rd Ranger Battalion commander at the time. And I think Colonel Leszczynski maybe was the 75th. But regardless, they wanted to prove that the regiment had the capability to jump in behind enemy lines and move an excessive distance like that and then still have effects on target. So we did. We did a 40-mile infill over a couple of days. And I was a mortar guy, so I had like a base plate and, I had a 120-pound rucksack and skinny little 135-pound kit or whatever I was back then. But it was awesome. Like, it sucked, but it was neat to do something like that and go, we just walked 40 miles and then hit a target.
How long did that take?
I think it took us like 2.5 days. Yeah, maybe 3. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But that was really neat. And then we did some stuff with the Germans. We did some cross-training, got our German shoots a sneer, marksmanship badge, did a foreign wing jump and some other things. And so that was literally like my first year in the Army. So like I thought all that was just normal. Like that was going on all over the place. And it definitely was not.
So how did you wind up in the conventional Army?
I got a DUI.
That was it?
That was it. Yeah, I got a DUI and they sent me to 3rd Infantry Division. And yeah, so next thing you know, I'm a mechanized infantryman. Instead of jumping out of planes, riding around in a tank.
Holy shit. How did that feel when you got the word, hey, you're done here, it's over?
Pretty awful. When it happened, my section started, my mortar section started at the time. So the E6 that was in charge of the mortar section, he got a DUI the same night. And so they kind of were making an example out of us. But it didn't happen right away. Like, that stuff happened, and we were, I guess, punished, for lack of a better term. We both got a general letter of reprimand that stays with you for your whole career, which was terrifying to me as a young private. But we didn't leave. We actually did the Germany thing after we got in trouble because they wanted, like, a full workforce. They wanted all the bodies to go do this exercise in Germany and spend this time over there. So I actually had good things happen in the regiment to where there was a point where I was like, maybe I'm not leaving. Maybe they just forgot about it. But no, the time came and I got orders when we got home from Germany and I left.
Damn.
But yeah, Third ID was a different experience. Had some really good leaders there, some funny leaders, and then some real pieces of shit that were in the organization. And I think what that taught me was in every organization in the military, and it's probably true in the Navy too, there's turds in every punch bowl. It's just depending on what level you're at, there's less. Like, there's good and bad in every organization. It's just, it's the percentages. And so I had some great folks, some great leadership, some people that changed my career. And a battalion commander in 3rd Infantry Division that was probably the difference between me getting out of the Army after 4 years, feeling defeated, like I got in trouble and I wouldn't be able to overcome it, to me re-enlisting and staying in the Army and continuing what ended up being a 20-year career.
Damn.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.